Hey there, you're looking kind of cute. Don't forget to subscribe and check out all my other socials. Enjoy. The ticking of the old grandfather clock echoed through the dimly lit living room, its steady rhythm a stark contrast to the tension hanging heavy in the air. Kieran sat rigid on the edge of the worn floral couch, hands clasped tightly in his lap as he stared at the faded carpet beneath his feet. Across from him, his mother paced back and forth, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor with each agitated step. "I just don't understand, Kieran," she said, her voice tinged with exasperation. "Why can't you be more like the other boys your age? Always with your head in those fashion magazines, playing with makeup. It's not natural." Kieran's shoulders hunched, trying to make himself smaller as his mother's words cut deep. He'd heard variations of this speech countless times before, but it never hurt any less. His gaze flickered to the stack of glossy fashion magazines peeking out from beneath the coffee table, his secret refuge filled with images of the person he longed to be. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I'll try harder to be normal." His mother stopped pacing, turning to face him with a mixture of frustration and disappointment etched across her features. "Oh, Kieran," she sighed, shaking her head. "Sometimes I wonder what I did wrong. If only I'd had a daughter instead." The words hung in the air, sharp and painful. Kieran felt his chest tighten, struggling to draw in a breath as he fought back tears. It wasn't the first time his mother had expressed this sentiment, but each repetition drove the knife deeper into his heart. "I'm going to my room," Kieran mumbled, rising from the couch and keeping his head down to hide the moisture gathering in his eyes. He hurried up the stairs, ignoring his mother's half-hearted protests. Once safely behind his closed bedroom door, Kieran allowed the tears to fall. He slumped against the wall, sliding down until he was curled up on the floor. His gaze landed on the full-length mirror across the room, reflecting back an image that felt foreign and wrong. Kieran stared at his reflection. Short brown hair, angular jawline, broad shoulders barely hidden beneath a baggy sweatshirt. Everything about his appearance screamed male, yet inside he felt anything but. With trembling hands, he reached for the shoebox hidden beneath his bed, carefully removing the lid to reveal its precious contents. Inside lay a carefully folded blouse in soft pink silk, a long auburn wig, and an assortment of makeup. Kieran's fingers trailed over the items reverently, a small smile tugging at his lips, despite the tears still streaking down his cheeks. This was his sanctuary, the only place where he truly felt like himself. With practiced movements, Kieran began his transformation. He slipped on the blouse, reveling in the feeling of the smooth fabric against his skin. The wig came next, carefully adjusted until it framed his face in soft waves. Lastly, he applied makeup with a steady hand, foundation to soften his features, a touch of blush for a rosy glow, and a swipe of pink lip gloss. As the final touches were added, Kieran felt the weight of the world lifting from his shoulders. He stood before the mirror once more, but this time the reflection staring back filled him with joy rather than despair. Gone was Kieran, the disappointment. In his place stood Rosalie, beautiful, confident, and finally whole. Rosalie twirled before the mirror, watching the blouse swirl around her hips. For a brief, beautiful moment, she allowed herself to imagine a world where she could be this person all the time, where her mother would look at her with pride instead of disappointment, where she could walk down the street as her true self without fear. But reality came crashing back as the sound of footsteps in the hallway jolted Rosalie from her reverie. Panic surged through her veins as she scrambled to hide the evidence of her transformation. The wig was hastily shoved under the bed, makeup wiped away with trembling hands, and the blouse exchanged for the baggy sweatshirt once more. By the time a knock sounded at the door, Kieran was back, outwardly male, inwardly aching. He called out a shaky, "Come in," praying his mother wouldn't notice the faint traces of mascara still clinging to his lashes. The door creaked open, revealing his mother's hesitant face. "Kieran, honey," she said softly, a note of remorse in her voice. "I'm sorry about earlier. I didn't mean to upset you. Kieran nodded stiffly, not trusting himself to speak. His mother stepped further into the room, her eyes roaming over the space as if searching for some clue to understand her child better. Kieran held his breath, acutely aware of how close she was to discovering his secret. I know I'm not always the easiest person to talk to, his mother continued, perching on the edge of the bed. But I do love you, Kieran. I just want what's best for you. The words, meant to be comforting, only twisted the knife deeper. Kieran wanted to scream, to tell her that what was best for him was to be Rosalie, to live as the woman he knew himself to be. But fear kept the words locked tight in his chest, suffocating him from the inside out. I love you too, Mom, he managed to choke out, the lie tasting bitter on his tongue. It wasn't a complete falsehood. He did love his mother, but not the version of himself she wanted him to be. His mother reached out, patting his hand awkwardly before standing. Well, I'll let you get some rest, she said, moving towards the door. Maybe tomorrow we could do something together, just the two of us? Kieran nodded mechanically, relief washing over him as the door finally closed behind her. He waited, listening intently until he heard her footsteps retreating down the stairs. Only then did he allow himself to breathe, collapsing back onto the bed as the tension drained from his body. As he lay there staring up at the ceiling, Kieran made a decision. He couldn't keep living like this, constantly hiding, suffocating beneath the weight of his mother's expectations. Something had to change. The next morning, Kieran rose early, his stomach churning with a mixture of excitement and terror. He dressed with care, choosing clothes that walked the line between masculine and feminine, skinny jeans that hugged his hips, a loose-fitting sweater in a soft lavender shade. He applied just a hint of makeup, barely noticeable unless you knew what to look for. Taking a deep breath, he made his way downstairs to the kitchen, where his mother was already bustling about, preparing breakfast. She looked up as he entered, her eyebrows raising slightly at his appearance. Good morning, Kieran said, forcing a smile. I was thinking, maybe we could go shopping today for some new clothes? His mother's face lit up, clearly relieved at what she perceived as an olive branch. Oh, that sounds wonderful, honey. I know just the place. They have a great selection of menswear. We'll find you some nice masculine outfits. Kieran's heart sank, but he pushed forward. Actually, Mom, I was hoping we could look at some different styles. Maybe something a little more diverse? His mother's smile faltered, confusion creeping into her expression. Diverse? What do you mean, Kieran? This was it, the moment of truth. Kieran's palms grew sweaty, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure his mother must be able to hear it. I mean, I'd like to try on some clothes that are typically considered more feminine, blouses, skirts, that sort of thing. The kitchen fell silent, save for the steady drip of the coffee maker. His mother stared at him, her face cycling through a range of emotions. Confusion, shock, anger, and finally settling on something that looked unsettlingly like grief. Kieran, she said slowly, her voice strained. What exactly are you trying to tell me? He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the words he'd rehearsed countless times in his head. Mom, I don't feel like a boy. I never have. Inside, I'm a girl. My name is Rosalie. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and irrevocable. No, Rosalie waited, hardly daring to breathe as she watched her mother process the revelation. No, her mother said finally, shaking her head. No, this is just a phase. You're confused, Kieran. We'll get you some help, talk to a therapist. I'm not confused, Rosalie interrupted, her voice stronger now. This is who I am, Mom. I've known for a long time. I'm a woman, and I want to live as one. Her mother's face crumpled, tears welling up in her eyes. But I wanted a son, she whispered, the words striking Rosalie like a physical blow. I never wanted a daughter. I wanted a daughter. The irony of the statement wasn't lost on either of them. For years, Rosalie had listened to her mother lament not having a daughter, and now that she finally did, it was the last thing she wanted. "I'm sorry I can't be the son you wanted," Rosalie said softly, fighting back her own tears. "But I can't keep pretending to be someone I'm not. It's killing me, Mom." Her mother turned away, gripping the edge of the kitchen counter so tightly her knuckles turned white. "I need some time," she said, her voice barely audible. I can't deal with this right now." Rosalie nodded, even though her mother couldn't see the gesture. She retreated from the kitchen, each step feeling like she was walking through molasses. As she climbed the stairs back to her room, she could hear the muffled sounds of her mother's sobs echoing through the house. The days that followed were filled with a tense, uncomfortable silence. Her mother avoided her as much as possible, barely speaking beyond curt, necessary exchanges. Rosalie felt like a ghost in her own home, drifting from room to room, unseen and unwanted. But despite the pain of her mother's rejection, Rosalie felt a sense of relief at finally speaking her truth. She began to make small changes, wearing more feminine clothing around the house, growing out her hair. Each day she looked in the mirror and saw more of her true self staring back. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to shift. Her mother's outright hostility faded into a wary acceptance. They still didn't talk much, but Rosalie caught her mother watching her sometimes with an expression that seemed more curious than angry. It was a cool autumn evening when the fragile peace between them finally broke. Rosalie had just returned from a therapy session, feeling emotionally drained but hopeful. She found her mother sitting in the living room, a photo album open on her lap. "Mom?" Rosalie said hesitantly, hovering in the doorway. "Is everything okay?" Her mother looked up, her eyes red-rimmed but clear. "I've been looking at these old photos," she said, her voice hoarse, "trying to understand, to see if there were signs I missed." Rosalie moved closer, perching on the arm of the couch. She peered at the album, recognizing pictures from her childhood, always the odd one out, uncomfortable in masculine clothes, gravitating towards traditionally feminine activities. "I was so focused on having the son I thought I wanted," her mother continued, tracing a finger over one of the photos. "I never stopped to consider what you needed, what would make you happy." Rosalie felt tears pricking at her eyes, hope blooming cautiously in her chest. "All I've ever wanted is to be myself," she said softly. "To be your daughter." Her mother looked up at her then, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time. "You are my daughter," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "And I'm sorry it took me so long to see that." The words Rosalie had longed to hear for so long washed over her like a healing balm. She slid down onto the couch, wrapping her arms around her mother in a tight embrace. As they cried together, years of pain and misunderstanding began to melt away, replaced by the tentative beginnings of understanding and acceptance. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There were still difficult conversations to be had, adjustments to be made. But as Rosalie sat there with her mother, looking through old photos and sharing stories, she felt a sense of peace she'd never known before. For the first time in her life, she was truly seen and accepted for who she was. As the evening wore on, Rosalie's mother closed the photo album and turned to face her daughter fully. "Rosalie," she said, testing out the name carefully. "It's a beautiful name. Did you choose it yourself?" Rosalie nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. "I've always loved it," she admitted. "It feels right, like it's always been my name, even when I couldn't use it." Her mother reached out, tucking a strand of Rosalie's growing hair behind her ear. "It suits you," she said softly. "I'm sorry I didn't give you the chance to tell me sooner. I've been so caught up in my own expectations that I couldn't see how much you were hurting." "It's okay, Mom," Rosalie said, squeezing her mother's hand. "We're here now. That's what matters." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both lost in thought. Finally, Rosalie's mother spoke again, her voice hesitant but determined. "I want to do better," she said. "To support you properly. What do you need from me?" The question caught Rosalie off guard. She'd spent so long trying to hide who she was, she'd never really allowed herself to consider what true support might look like. I I'm not sure, Usa, she admitted. But maybe we could figure it out together? Her mother nodded, a tentative smile crossing her face. I'd like that, she said. Perhaps we could start with that shopping trip you mentioned before, for clothes that make you feel like yourself. Rosalie's heart swelled with emotion. It was a small step, but a significant one. That would be wonderful, she said, her voice thick with unshed tears. As they made plans for their shopping excursion, Rosalie felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There were still many challenges to face, from legal name changes to potential hormone therapy. But for the first time, she didn't feel like she had to face those challenges alone. The next day, as Rosalie and her mother walked into the department store together, there was a newfound ease between them. Her mother's eyes widened slightly at the sight of the women's section, but she squared her shoulders and forged ahead, determined to support her daughter. "Where should we start?" her mother asked, looking around at the racks of clothing with a mixture of uncertainty and determination. Rosalie's gaze was drawn to a display of flowing summer dresses in soft pastel shades. She'd always admired them from afar, never daring to imagine she might one day wear one herself. "Maybe over there?" she suggested hesitantly, gesturing towards the dresses. Her mother nodded, leading the way with only the slightest hesitation in her step. As they browsed through the racks together, Rosalie felt a surge of gratitude for her mother's effort. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of awkwardness, times when her mother's ingrained ideas about gender showed through. But she was trying, and that meant more to Rosalie than she could express. After selecting a few dresses to try on, they made their way to the fitting rooms. Rosalie's hands shook slightly as she closed the door behind her, facing her reflection in the mirror. This was it, a moment she'd dreamed of for so long. She slipped on the first dress, a pretty floral print in shades of pink and purple. As the fabric settled around her, Rosalie felt a sense of rightness wash over her. She smoothed her hands down the skirt, marveling at how natural it felt. Taking a deep breath, she stepped out of the fitting room to show her mother. There was a moment of silence as her mother took in the sight, her eyes widening slightly. "Oh, Rosalie," she breathed, her voice soft with wonder. "You look beautiful." The words, so simple yet so profound, brought tears to Rosalie's eyes. For years, she'd longed to hear her mother say something like that, to see her as the daughter she truly was. And now, standing there in a pretty dress, with her mother looking at her with pride instead of disappointment, Rosalie felt truly seen for the first time. As they continued their shopping trip, trying on various outfits and accessories, Rosalie felt a newfound confidence blossoming within her. With each item she tried on, each approving nod or smile from her mother, she stood a little taller, smiled a little brighter. Thanks for watching. The rest won't be viewable on YouTube, so check out Patreon if you want more. I hope you have a wonderful day, my cutie.